Hey there, in today's video, I'm going to do some testing with the DJI Osmo Nano. I'm making this video because I recently reviewed the DJI Nano from a runner's point of view. There's a link in the description below and I'll put something at the end. At the end of the review, I had some questions and I decided to answer them by doing a lot of testing. Testing the storage capacity, the battery life, the charging time, data transfer times, overheating indoors and outdoors, and some unexpected durability testing. Now, as always, this video might be long. There are chapter markers down below, so you can skip on through to the bits you might be interested in. Let's get going. To go through some of the testing parameters, I used the DJI Nano 128GB model. There's also a 64GB version. I updated to the firmware version 01010860. The memory card was a SanDisk Extreme 128GB card. I'll put all the details up here. When it was indoors, it was about 20 degrees centigrade, 68 Fahrenheit. Outdoors was roughly the same, 19 degrees centigrade, 66.2 Fahrenheit. I did a lot of putting the camera in the fridge to keep it clear for lots of tests. There was one camera only. Generally, it was only one test, but I have been using it for about 2 or 3 weeks. And the results you get may vary depending on your circumstances and parameters. Test 1 was measuring the storage versus the recording time, and the purpose was to see which one ran out first. I did 2 types of testing, 4K testing and 1080p testing. Again, I'll put all the details up here. DJI say that with the 128GB version, there's usually 107.6GB available. The camera itself told me there was 107.46GB available. I tested with the camera and the dock with the 4K configuration. I tried to get as powerful as possible as battery draining. The stability was on. I used D-Log M 10-bit, 30 frames per second, 4:3 for a bigger frame. Had the always on display on the dock, 2 minutes time to the screen going off, high bitrate, pro settings on, all those kinds of things. A heavy test, but I put it in the fridge to be absolutely sure there'd be no overheating. The result was that the storage was full before the battery depleted. The storage depletion time was 2 hours, 7 minutes and 46 seconds. That's how much of the 4K recording I got. The storage ended just before the battery died. In the camera and the dock, which we used together, there was 2% battery remaining in the dock and 3% in the camera. And the storage used had 119 gigabytes recorded, more than DJI predicted. And those files were a combination of mostly the MP4 files, but some WAV files, a backup waveform audio file, and some LRV files, some low resolution video. Test 1B was with the camera and the dock, just like the first test, 1080p, 30 frames per second, 16.9 8-bit. Electronic image stability off, the always display on, off, the screen when recording, 15 seconds, and the bitrate low, pro settings off. Essentially light data, and again, it was put into the fridge. And the result, what's surprising, was the battery depleted a long time before the storage was full. I was surprised by how much. The battery depleted after 2 hours, 50 minutes, 5 seconds, so it ran longer than it did when doing 4K. But in terms of the storage used, I only used 15.49 gigabytes, so a tiny fraction of the card, of which 9.48 gigabytes was in the MP4 files. The other were .lrv and .wav files. There were 5 hours and 34 minutes of recording time left according to the camera. Now, the conclusion of that is that if you want to record in 4K, the 128GB DJI Nano is a great option. The battery time is well matched to the storage. If you want to record in low-res 1080p, then just go with 64GB DJI Nano, because the battery will deplete well before the storage is full. Test 2 was battery life. Essentially almost all the same tests that I did in test 1, but the results expressed differently. If the storage ran out before the battery, I let the battery run on. DJI say that the DJI Nano has 200 minutes of battery life in the camera plus the dock, 90 minutes of battery life in the main camera at 1080p, and 60 minutes runtime in the main camera at 4K. And as with all their claims, there are a lot of terms and conditions that apply. So did some tests. Let's see what I got. Test 2A was the camera and the dock, again in 4K heavy workload. And I got a maximum battery life of 2 hours, 90 minutes, which is 139 minutes overall. Again, I put the camera in the fridge to avoid any sense of overheating issues. Test 2B was the same camera plus the dock in 1080p. The maximum battery life I got was 2 hours, 50 minutes and 5 seconds, or 170 minutes. Closer to the 200 minutes of DJI's claim, but not quite there. But again, settings, terms and conditions, all that stuff might vary. Test 2C was the battery life with just the camera only in, again, the 4K data heavy, and again in the fridge. And I got a maximum recording time, which I was quite impressed with, of 52 minutes, 29 seconds. I got 46.8 gigabytes in files, 43.91 were MP4s, and the rest was made up of LRF and WAV files. My battery life conclusion is that it's actually pretty decent battery life in the camera and the dock at 4K, and it's also pretty decent life for what I would expect out of a camera this size in 4K. There's more battery life at lower resolutions, but there'd be no real surprise there. The third set of tests was charging time, and test 3A was the camera and the dock connected to the mains, a 29-watt Apple charger. DJI say that when charging the Osmo Nano main camera, it takes 20 minutes to get to 80% battery. So I started with the battery at 0% in the camera and also at 0% in the dock. And when you plug them in initially, you notice that the dock starts for a bit and then it starts mainly on the camera, which makes sense. The camera got to 80% after 17 minutes, and then it took till 40 minutes to get to 100%. The dock was 80% after 21 minutes, and then the dock was 100% after 64 minutes. When plugged in, the dock starts to charge immediately, followed very quickly by the camera, which then grows faster. The camera is 80% after 17 minutes and 100% after 40 minutes, and the dock charged to 80% after 21 minutes, and the dock charged to 100% after 64 minutes. Test 3B was charging time, where I just had the dock to the camera and not connected to the mains. And at the start, I had the dock at 100%, the camera at 0. And after 15 minutes, the dock was 54%, the camera was 81%. 30 minutes, 38 seconds after that period of time, the dock was 38% and the camera was 100%. There was still charge in the dock, so I drained the camera and came back with the dock to camera on the second time, again, not connected to the mains. And at the start, I was 38%, the camera was 0%. And after 60 minutes of hanging around, the dock was 10% and the camera was 5%. Not totally sure why that something isn't quite adding up. Powered the camera on and all it would record for was 4 minutes, 2 seconds. My conclusion after the charging tests was that the batteries get to 80% really fast, and from 80% to 100%, it's really slow. And you're much better off charging intermittently docked camera if you need the extra juice, rather than waiting for one to drain. Charge intermittently. I was quite happy with most of the test results, except for test 4, the internal data transfer. DJI Nano records the camera, and then you can internally transfer it to an SD card that you can buy separately. When the storage on the camera is full, you can transfer it. On the DJI Osmo Action 2, you can choose either, which I hope on software you can do with this camera, because DJI say that the multi-vision dock includes built-in micro SD card slot for quick storage export with a single tap. Now, it's more than a single tap, it's only a couple of taps. What they don't tell you is it's a huge long wait. I transferred 115.54 gigabytes from the card, again made up of MP4, LRF and WAV files, and the time to transfer all that was 32 minutes, 4 seconds. That's a hell of a long time to do that. Worse, the battery at the start of the transfer in both cameras was 100%, dock was 100%, but at the end, the battery had finished, the camera was 100% and the dock was 39%. It'd be so much easier to just be able to store separately. And my conclusion really is that you'd use the internal transfer from the camera to a card only in a worst case scenario. It's a lot quicker to come home and just plug in with USB to a computer or out on the road. It's much quicker, it doesn't drain the battery, and I really do hope DJI solve that in a firmware issue very quickly. It really is a major disappointment compared to the DJI Action 2. Test 5 was all about overheating. There have been some overheating issues, and I certainly noticed it with the previous Action 2. If I use it in the car, it would overheat. And I had some early overheating issues with the DJI Nano, but I tested it at room temperature with the camera and dock in 4K, and room temperature was 19.5 degrees centigrade, 67.1 Fahrenheit. The camera was stationary, not moving, so no wind cooling, and it overheated after 110 minutes. At that stage, there was only 4% battery left in the camera and 4% in the dock, so it wasn't a great big deal, but it did overheat towards the end of its recording, storage capacity, and battery life. I then tried the same test indoors with the camera only. It was 20 degrees centigrade, 68 Fahrenheit, again in the 4K, and I recorded for 49 minutes with the camera stationary before the battery died. The battery died before it overheated. I did some outdoor testing. I did all of these in 4K because of the most high intensity. I ran around for 38 minutes and 20 seconds with no overheating and a few minutes of battery life at the end of my run. I then did a much longer test. I ran 3/4 of a marathon outside with the camera mounted on my head and using a twice nod expression to get it started. I had plenty of clips. I had 44 30-second clips. And when I was finished, I had 47% battery at the end. I didn't use the dock at all. I had absolutely no overheating issues. And the conclusion really is the camera can overheat indoors. If you want to use an action camera indoors, something like the DJI Action 5 has been very good for me for not overheating, but I couldn't get it to overheat outdoors, not in my testing. And look, it's an action camera. If you're out there using it in action scenarios, I don't think it's going to overheat. Test 6 was all about durability, my most unplanned test. I was running to finish the 3/4 marathon, just a couple of 100 yards before the finish, accelerating on smooth tarmac. Suddenly found myself on grass until I wasn't. Then I was on grass again, alpha flying, as Stephen called it. There wasn't a scratch on me or the well, there was a couple of scratches on me. There wasn't a scratch on the DJI Nano. I had the DJI Mic 3 attached on a magnet onto my hat, and the magnet didn't lose. It was so strong, nothing fell off, and the camera kept recording. Yeah, operator malfunction, I think it's called. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful. If you did, it'd be great if you'd hit the like button. As always, we've got stuff in the description below. I'll happily answer any questions you've put in the comments. There'll be a big blue subscribe button popping up there and some raid videos there. Thanks for watching. Until the next video, just keep running along.